It's the New England Take. I'm your host, AJ Kierstead. Be sure to check out nhtalkradio.com to get all the back episodes of the show, and my new website, thenewenglandtake.com. Be sure to check that out. We're hoping to really expand that. So if you're an interested writer in the state or photographer or content producer, please do reach out. The New England Take at gmail.com. I'd love to start getting some contributors for that site. Excited to be joined this week by Representative Keith Ammon. He's a New Hampshire representative, Republican. He's the vice chair of the Commerce and Consumer Affairs Committee over at Concord, over at the statehouse, and he represents New Boston, Mount Vernon, and Lindborough. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, AJ. Great to be with you.
So I wanted to have a chance to talk to someone that's over in the State House that isn't a reporter, because I usually speak to reporters all the time. Talk about what's up with the Republican side. You have a narrow majority going on over at the House, which obviously can cause a bit of like, okay, we got to kind of play nice to a certain extent, maybe, sort of. I mean, after the first 2 weeks of things beginning to take place, so what's the atmosphere?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's certainly something very different in the atmosphere at the State House this term. So far, I think it's actually worked out for the better that we have a lot of collegiality between Democrats and Republicans. We both understand we have to work together because of the slim majority. So I know if you look through the archives of decades or maybe even a century ago at the State House, when a similar thing, I think it was over 100 years ago, a similar thing happened, it was very contentious. And I was sort of expecting that, but so far it's been, cats and dogs getting along. So
that's great. I mean, do you attribute some of that to the fact that we're finally, for the most part, past a lot of the people freaking out about COVID and getting in the house? I mean, we're further away from some of the chaos that was triggering stuff when it comes to abortion and Trump and things like that. It seems like everyone has their own agendas that they're coming into the State House, obviously wanting to get in place, but a lot of the more nationwide, really heated subjects don't seem to be as prevalent, at least as I'm perusing Twitter and seeing what people are talking about.
Yeah, it is kind of an eerily calm period. So who knows what will blow up next? But yeah, knock on wood. But the last 2 years have been, dominated by COVID. It was such a strange time to be at the State House during the COVID pandemic, and kudos to the speaker and his staff and the majority leader for all the creative ways they came up with to have the House still conduct business during that pandemic, because you sort of have to cater to the lowest common denominator. There are people with health issues. There are people who are, they're just hesitant about going outside. Maybe some of that has to do with what news channel they're tuned into, where they're getting their information from. But yeah, so far it's been normal. We haven't had. There's some mask wearing still in the State House, but it's, that's wear a mask or don't wear a mask. That's your choice, right? So
yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's basically the way it's going to be forever. There's going to be a handful of people that still decide to wear a mask, but all the power to you if you feel like it. It's hard to talk to you and understand what you're saying half the time, but it makes you feel safe. I'm happy to at least have people in person, because it's just a totally different atmosphere than Zoom and online for having political discussions.
It is, and so it's also, the House changes over 30 to 40% every term. So there's new people, and it's hard to get to know somebody on a Zoom call or what they say on a social media. It's nothing like it is when you actually are face to face and having a discussion. It's so important in building relationships with, people across the aisle and freshmen that come into the House.
So let's talk about specifically the right side of the aisle. I mean, coming into this term, generally speaking, with the Republicans in this state, the Democrats have their siloing of different factions and such, obviously. But with New Hampshire, there's very much a split between the more libertarian Republicans and the more conservative traditional Republicans that have their own agendas that they come at things with. As you start looking at the legislation that's being proposed and the people are coming over to Concord to discuss what they want to do, What's it like within the party? I mean, is there a singular drive for some of the bills that are being proposed, or is it kind of a mixed bag with it still being this early in the session?
I think I'd say mixed bag. One of the things that's great about our house, our legislature, is people come from all different walks of life. Um, Lots of different things motivate people to run for office in the state house, and anybody can put in a bill, and every bill submitted has to be voted on. So we get ideas that are across the spectrum, and even some ideas that might seem outlandish and like people might ask, why did someone put a bill in like that? Even some of the more long shot bills are actually important for starting discussions and about the role of government, or maybe the law it's trying to affect was 100 years old and it's time for an update, even if it's not that exact bill. So I really appreciate how even though the House might seem turbulent, it's actually a good thing because it gives you a broad spectrum of representation from our society and from our voters. And I think the end result, after it gets through the House, the Senate, the governor weighs in, we have much better outcomes than if the state was governed by just a few lawyers that were highly paid to be in office, right? So.
Yeah, and regarding the discussion, though, you got to be careful with what exactly it is you're proposing so you don't come across like a bit of a troll necessarily, or just taking it so far that both sides of the aisle end up going after you. I'm definitely not talking about Joe Sweeney this past week.
For instance,
if I was to pull someone out of nowhere, I mean, I wouldn't say anything like that. It's already been knocked out, so everyone can move on with their lives.
He's probably going to hear this, but I imagine the co-sponsors were Sweeney and Alexander and Barry, right? So I imagine them sitting around drinking one day and saying like, "What should we make the fees?" And they kept saying like higher and higher numbers until they got to something 10,000% increase.
Like some crazy amount of signatures. I'm like, guys, slow down. I mean, you just look like you're just trying to make a discussion and no one's gonna take seriously. I'm like, come on.
The funny thing is they made the $2 fee for the state representative $0. So oh my gosh. They made all the higher offices were like a 10,000% increase, and the $2 went to $0 for the state rep. I think that's an indication that it was what I call a conversation starter. And,
yeah. It's a nice way to put it. It's a very nice way to put it. Well, did pay off. I don't think it necessarily paid off. You never know. Things change over time. All right. So let's talk about some of the stuff that matters on the Republicans, but especially with you. I think so we're talking to Representative Keith Ammon he represents New Boston, Mount Vernon, Lindborough. I mean, you're on the vice chair of the Commerce and Consumer Affairs Committee, and you have an obvious interest in digital assets and nuclear technology. So there's a whole huge can of worms that we've talked about a little bit before, especially with the crypto side. But let's start off with maybe the digital currency side of things. What are some big things you're coming into this year hoping to either investigate or accomplish?
Yeah, great question. I guess I'd first like to thank my constituents for letting me pursue some of these higher, level interests. Or, as I said, our house, we come from lots of different backgrounds, so we bring our own expertise, our own individual expertise to the House. And I think this is something that I can contribute that will benefit the state as a whole. So in the area of digital assets, the governor created a commission. It was the first executive order that he signed in 2022, so last year. The very first executive order he signed was to create a governor's commission on cryptocurrencies and digital assets. And there was one House position on that commission, and the speaker, thank you to the speaker. He appointed me as the House representative. And so we've met about once a month, and members of the commission included experts from the public. Some of them are very well known in the cryptocurrency space, and then also representatives from the banking Department, the Attorney General's office, the Securities Division of the Secretary of State. We had a representative from the Credit Union Association, and from there's a banking association. So a broad spectrum of the financial interests in the state as well as the regulators. And the governor gave us a charge to basically come up with recommendations about how New Hampshire could be a leader in this area. And so we put together it was at the direction of William Ardinger, who is a well-known tax attorney in the state. He was the chair of the commission. He did a lot of the heavy lifting on putting the report together. The report it's about 50 pages. It's got lots of good recommendations for the state, for our regulators, for our university system, for the legislature. It's been delivered to the governor. It was delivered, I think, right after New Year's. And he was busy with his inauguration. And so he's reviewing it, and we expect there to be a public announcement, a public release of that any day now. One interesting thing about New Hampshire, our current financial system, our current global financial system, was launched in the 1940s in Bretton Woods, the Bretton Woods Accord, where member nations from all over the world, representatives from member nations came, and they established the current financial system. This is my opinion. I don't think I'm wrong. I think digital assets, cryptocurrency, are going to be the foundation of the next big financial system. The space right now is kind of the Wild West. Everybody knows about FTX's collapse. I've been involved in this space for over a decade. So I've seen some of these things before. And I would caution people to not, even though there are some hiccups in the growing influence of the space, and FTX is a big one, that it's not going away. And even recently, an senior IRS official said cryptocurrency is not going away, and that we need to learn how to interface with that space. So New Hampshire has the potential to be one of the leading jurisdictions in cryptocurrency and digital assets if we do it right. And a lot of that involves educating lawmakers, regulators, the general public into what it is and why it could be so influential.
Do you think? So there's so many aspects of crypto. I mean, there's whole multi-day conferences that discuss all aspects of these sorts of things.
Yeah.
But at the state level, for sorting it out, I mean, what are a couple of the most important aspects that should be considered by lawmakers that I'm hoping that you're going to be going into proposing over this next year or two here? Is it consumer protection? Is it making it more legitimate within financial institutions know what to do with it? Is it sorting out some of the law enforcement angles of it, like we saw with FTX, which obviously was $8 billion just went MIA. Unfortunately, they managed to recover $5 million as of this week. Supposedly, God knows where they got that money from. It's kind of interested to hear where exactly that so much money was just sitting and just was gone for a couple months. I mean, what are some of the important things in the early days that at the state level you're hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, so back in 2017, I want to say New Hampshire. I was a co-sponsor of the bill then. New Hampshire had one of the first pieces of legislation about money transmission through money transmitter laws, applying it to cryptocurrency only aspects. So if you had, let's say you had, pick a coin, right? If you had Litecoin and you wanted to exchange it with me for Bitcoin or whatever, whatever coin it was, some digital to digital swap, that we exempted we exempted people doing that from state money transmitter laws, but we kept the consumer protection aspect of it in place. So if you defrauded me in that transaction, I would have a recourse and I could get up to triple, I think, damages from you. So that was kind of one of the first things. What we did last year was we implemented, and this is current law now, it's so the Uniform Law Commission is a group of attorneys and representatives from different states that try to come up with standardized laws between states. And the commercial code is generally left at the state level. So the idea is to standardize the commercial code between states so that when one business in one jurisdiction interfaces with another one, that the laws are similar. So
super important.
Yeah. Stop me if I get too in the weeds, but they came up with a brand new Article 12, which deals with digital assets. And we were the first state to adopt the most recent version of that. So now here's why that's important. Lots of people who are in the geek space, right, who understand the stuff very well, understand that one of the most beneficial things about digital assets is that you can custody them yourself and no one else can control it. So think about like hiding physical cash under the mattress. Cryptocurrency allows for that in the digital space, that same aspect. But if you lose the keys that represent whatever your assets are, it could be $1 million, right? If you lose those keys, then those assets vanish. No one can recover them for you. So most people aren't that comfortable with their own technical skills to be able to do that, and especially do it over a long term. So the digital asset space, it's really about creating intergenerational wealth in that space. That's the long goal. It's not just, month to month or a temporary period. It's about long term, your children, and leaving wealth to your children and your grandchildren. So since most people aren't that technically savvy, they rely on a third party to store those things for them. That's called custody, to be a custodian of those assets. And so the UCC Article 12 develops rules around the custodians so that they have, well-defined set of guidelines. So that way, when you give your assets over to them, that they're well cared for. It's not a fly-by-night operation that is going to get hacked and lose your keys and then your assets disappear, right? So that's why that was important.
Yeah, and we even saw with FTX, which was around for a very long time, it had considerable international audience of people investing. The reason why they managed to get so many billions of dollars invested into them. That's the problem with it. It's now there's ways of enforcing some of that, but I mean it's so hard to track it down. All right, we got about 2.5 minutes left in this segment, so I just want to quickly bring up, is there any prospects for discussing nuclear in any way over this next session?
Yeah, so let me put a plug in. So I'm the chair of Commission to Study Nuclear Technology. Here's my plug. If you want to find out about that commission, go to nuclearnh.com, and you'll be able to access all of our meetings. We have video recordings of all our presenters. The commission will run until December 2023, so we're about a quarter of the way into the lifetime of the commission. Our next meeting will be Monday, January 23rd at 1:30. It's held in Concord at the Department of Environmental Services. That information will be posted Monday on that website. There's a mailing list. If you're interested, you can sign up to receive mailing information. And our presenters will be a representative from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on Monday the 23rd, and Westinghouse Nuclear. Those will be our presenters. So we're trying to have a mix of, so we're in the information gathering stage at this point, but we want a mix of regulators and industry associations, but also manufacturers of what are called small modular reactors. That's really the focus. Small modular reactors are, as the name implies, they're reactors that are small. They're built so they can't melt down, and they're modular, so you can put them close to the source of where they're used. And one early application for small modular reactors is, and this is happening in Wyoming, they're taking a coal power plant, which has all of the infrastructure to take heat and turn it into electricity. And instead of using coal to make the heat, they're putting a small modular reactor in place. And so they're repurposing the coal plant to be a zero emissions plant and still maintaining most of the jobs for that area, because they're retraining. A lot of the jobs translate directly, but the coal specific aspect. They're retraining those employees to understand the nuclear aspect of it. So there's lots of really cool things coming in that space. We're probably a few years early, but now's the time to ramp up our expertise in the area so that we're one of the first places to take advantage.
DC, my God, it's just been bananas since Biden was put into office, but especially in the last few weeks. I mean, something that really stood out this past week was the fact that all sorts of classified documents were found over in his Biden's properties, whether it was
next to his Corvette.
Next to his Corvette. Talk about the total stereotype coming. I'm not calling him corrupt, but let's just say in theory, it comes across very corrupt. Oh yeah, I kept all these classified documents next to my sports car in a garage.
The timing of the release is strange too, right? So they knew about some of this before the November election and waited to disclose it. So
yeah, it just makes it. I mean, maybe they found out like right around that time. Say they're being totally honest with all of it.
Sure.
It just makes them look terrible. It's such bad imagery in politics around the situation. It encourages the MAGA Republicans, of which I am not one of, that to just continue to needle the Democrats and the FBI and everyone as being corrupt with the current state of what's going on in Congress right now. I mean, good God, they're just opening a can of worms.
Yeah, I guess the most interesting thing to me is how, I mean, this is from my political perspective. So every news source is biased.
Yeah.
Some are biased from the left, some are from the right. I'm suspicious of the ones who claim to be unbiased. I wish there was a resurgence of old school journalism. That would be awesome. But so the left biased media who kind of put up this umbrella shield to protect Biden from all of his mistakes has kind of collapsed over this, especially when they found the second cache next to his Corvette.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting to see that the left media, which seems like the majority of the media, are now all of a sudden asking piercing and critical questions of the White House. And I think that's a moment to note that it's sort of a change in how the media is dealing with the president.
Yeah. I mean, when literally the only voice of reason or not being a Democrat is Peter Doocy over in the White House press room. I mean, he's the only guy there for the most part because the terrible way that the White House press corps operates, which Breaking Points has talked about this a fair bit because Sager, who's one of their hosts, we used to be part of it, and he always calls out how corrupt and terrible it is because you only have one message going out. You have whatever the White House press secretary says goes out until Peter Doocy goes viral on Twitter and gets all sorts of attention that they have to cover.
Because it's so unusual.
Yeah.
The reason the press enjoys constitutional protections for their industry is because they're supposed to help us understand, cut through the propaganda that is going to come out of any government administration, right? So that's what governments do. They spin the truth so that it benefits their long-term success, right? So the media's job is supposed to cut through that BS, I'll call it, and give us a little bit of glimpse of what's actually happening. And up until now in the Biden administration, I think most outlets are just repeating the talking points that they're given and even like spinning them further. So it's even more propagandized. Fox is always going to have a opposite reaction because that's where they're coming from.
They're just as bad. It's just
they're just as bad, but at least they're asking the opposite question, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if we can't have quote unquote unbiased legitimate media covering it, at least there's a little bit of back and forth. I mean, I am not a fan of Newsmax or any of those other outlets that kind of exploded during the Trump administration, but at least there's someone there saying something out so people in the middle like myself, a little WKXL and my own website can at least say, okay, here's what the two sides are saying, putting in between. I've said this multiple times. Something Ben Shapiro always says is listen to his show and listen to Pod Save America. Somewhere in the middle is the reality of the situation that of what's actually going on. I want to get your take on what happened with Kevin McCarthy this past week and a half, because I was conflicted. On one side, I was like, this chaos is beautiful. I want this to go on forever. They're just a bunch of knuckleheads that just can't get their act together. But on the other side, I'm like, oh God, these people run our country to a certain extent, and they can't even figure out one guy who can run Congress as the Speaker of the House. I mean, what was your take?
Yeah, so I guess I have a little bit of a different take. So if it would be an interesting exercise if you took all the speeches from the rebels who didn't vote for McCarthy. If you listen to their speeches, which I listened to quite a bit of it, I'm a kind of a junkie for history, so that 15 rounds of voting on speaker, that hasn't happened since before the Civil War. So once it went past I think it was 7 or 9, I can't remember exactly, drawing a blank, but once it went past the most recent example, which was 100 years ago, I really started paying attention. So, but listening to their speeches, I think there's some benefit to that. Normally when you watch C-SPAN, there's someone giving a speech and there's nobody in the audience in the House chamber, right? So they're giving a speech on legislation or policy, and they're only speaking to the camera, that their colleagues aren't even in their seats. That was a rare time when the entire House was packed and they had to stay there and listen to the speeches. And a lot of them were grandstanding for their own political gain, but some of them were pointing out real issues in the governance of the House that need to be fixed. And if the outcome was that they had to work an extra 3 or 4 days, actually had to sit and listen, and the outcome was the rules of the House were positively affected, that some of the rot that has sort of creeped into the rules has been, removed, cut out, then I think that's probably a long-term benefit. And, it takes a lot of courage to be one of a few doing something. But so, I'd like to see more of that, honestly.
Yeah,
not so much the political grandstanding, but pointing out the flaws in the system and demanding that they be fixed. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I totally get that take, and that's one advantage to having a bunch of call them the table throwers in Congress right now that are like, we need to reset. Like I can't remember if it was, I think it was Lauren Boebert have brought up a piece of legislation that was just one page and is pushing once again for us to try and minimize the amount of earmarks that are added onto every little piece of legislation, because I think it's just there's so much pork and just garbage added onto everything that's put out there nowadays, and it's just counterproductive. No one understands what's going on.
Yeah, I think one benefit to that whole escapade was it sent a signal to the Senate that if they tried to, and McCarthy, after he was elected, he stated this, that if the Senate tries to send a gigantic omnibus bill to the House, and this is what they do. Unfortunately, a little bit of this happens in Concord as well. But you take one bill and you put 30, 100 could be different subjects into the same bill and pass it as like you only get to vote up or down on all those different things. And a lot of times there's pork and a lot of spending involved. So having McCarthy, he can say that if you send us an omnibus bill, that our Republican caucus isn't going to support it. We'll see how it plays out, but at least that's kind of minimizing those kinds of bills, I think would be a good thing, because each subject should be voted on up or down.
New Hampshire Representative Keith Ammon, thanks so much for joining me. It's been a fun conversation.
Thanks, AJ. This was great. Appreciate it.
TheNewEnglandTake.com to get more from the show, NHTalkRadio.com to get more from WKXL. I'm your host, AJ Kierstead, and this has been The New England Take.